and welcome back to the Bible, My Cats and I. Today we're going to be studying Matthew chapter 7, the last part of the Sermon on the Mount. But before we go there, I'm going to tell you a story of something that just happened. I call this the Bible, My Cats and I for a reason. Anyway, my husband and I recently built our dream home. And you know, it's really a lot of fun because you get to pick out all of your lighting fixtures and your faucets and everything that goes in the house. Really fun. So we decided in the master bathroom, we were going to go with one of those new contemporary standalone vessel bathtubs. So here's a picture of what we got. Really love it. It's really cool. It's got this stopper in the bottom. All you do is step on it and it stops the water so that the bathtub can fill. And then I also like the combination of really contemporary with some really vintage feel. And so look at this faucet that I found. It's really cool. It's that telephone type faucet. It's in the nickel, the polished nickel that I love. Thought it would go great with this tub. And the other thing I really like about it is that it's got easy to use handles. We're very ADA compliant as much as we can in this house, not only because my husband and I are aging, we have a daughter who's disabled, and so we look at handles to faucets to make sure they would be easy to use. And these are, they're elongated handles, and you just push them down and the water goes on. Very good. We love this tub. Then these guys come into the picture. Now, the other day, my husband heard some water running, and he thought, well, that's kind of odd. What's going on? And he didn't think a whole lot of it, but a little bit later after breakfast, he continued to hear water running. So he decided that he would check it out, and he followed the sound, and he made his way into our master bedroom, and yes, sure enough, the water was coming from there, and made his way into our bathroom, and lo and behold, this is what he found.
Oh my gosh.
The water was about 1/4 inch from overflowing in the tub. So what had happened was a series of events that, any one of these factors not being involved, it wouldn't have been a problem. But because all of these factors came in, we almost had a disaster in our new home. So for one thing, all the cats had to do was to step on the stopper. And now the tub was locked closed. Then they jumped up on the handles, which, as you recall, I mentioned, all you do is turn them down and they're very easy to use. They go downward. So a cat walking across the handles turned the water on. Not just turned it on full force, which caused a problem because although the tub does have a drain at the top of the lip, it's a small drain, and it was not able to withstand the full flow of all the water that was coming into the tub. So the combination of the plug and the way it works, the handles and the way they work, the amount of water that was coming in versus the drain at the top edge of the tub and the cats, that combination could have caused a disaster. Now, had that happened, we would have had a choice. We could have gotten very angry or upset or judgmental about the manufacturers and how they designed these things so that this sort of thing could happen. But in reality, who was at fault? Well, we were the most at fault. We really should have judged ourselves because we knew about our cats and we had all of the factors in place, but we just hadn't added them up. So I told you that story as a sort of object lesson, I guess you could say, for this lesson on chapter 7 of Matthew, which is the end of the Sermon on the Mount. Sermon on the Mount goes through chapter 5, 6, and 7. And it's sort of an example of how it's better not to jump to judging others, but take a look at your own responsibility first. Judge yourself first before you go judging others. Okay. Now, while there are many verses in our study in this lesson that can and do stand alone, we need to remember that this is a part of a whole and that the writer of this gospel chose to arrange these words and these teachings of Jesus in such a way so that we have now not only his beginning teachings on our own Christian character and our righteousness, our influence on others, our religious practice, even our own religious ambitions. And now he brings it around to how this plays out in our relationships with one another. So that's the emphasis on this chapter as a whole, is how all of these teachings that have come prior in the Sermon on the Mount now relate to our relationships with others. If you haven't read the chapter, just press pause, read through chapter 7 and come back to us. We're going to start with chapter 7, obviously, verses 1 and 2. Again, these are standalone verses. You hear them all the time, even from people who don't really normally read the Bible or aren't practicing Christians. But the first verse is, "Do not judge, or you too will be judged." Right? So there's a warning there, and it's used a lot. Chapter 7, verse 2 says, "For in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use, it will be measured to you." Why do you think Jesus or the writer of Matthew's gospel would have felt it necessary to begin the conclusion with this? It sort of bookends with the Beatitudes at the very beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, where we hear, "Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy." But here we say, "Don't judge, or you too will be judged." The Sermon on the Mount begins with things that are familiar with people and a really wonderful, nice statement. But then we're ending here with, "Hey guys, this is serious." And it's like a warning, right? And Jesus follows this with sort of an example of what this looks like. He says in verse 3, "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there's a plank in your own?" This is a great example of Jesus' use of hyperbole when he teaches. Of course, we don't have a plank in our own eye, but he's trying to make a point. Notice also the term brother or sister. This is a term of close relationship, and it usually is used in the Bible, a relationship with a person within the faith community. So this lesson here is Jesus telling us that, check yourself first. See, Proverbs 21:2 says that every way of a person is right in their own eyes. Isn't that true? We all think that we're following things really well. And yet it's so important to us that we'll turn to others and we'll realize, well, they're not doing it. And so we come with judgment and condemnation. And that's what he's warning us against. Check yourself first. We think we're all following everything really great, but every scholar I have ever read on this subject has admitted that these things that are laid down in the Sermon on the Mount are pretty much unsurmountable for us human beings. We are bound to have our failures and make our mistakes when it comes to following these to the T. So always check yourself. But it is interesting too, in that he uses that term brother, which means a relationship. And so it's almost like he's assuming because of that relationship, we will be helping each other to remove the speck from each other's eyes. But we need to remember that it needs to be done first and foremost in a spirit of humility and self-assessment before we try and help each other, right? Okay. Then he goes on, verse 6, "Do not give dogs what is sacred. Do not throw your pearls to pigs. If you do, they may trample them under feet and turn and tear you to pieces." Well, okay, so this first part is don't judge others, but then it's saying don't give to dogs what's sacred. Don't throw your pearls to pigs. That sounds to me like that requires some judgment, right? Well, I think what he's trying to say is don't be judgmental and condemning, especially to your brothers, but also be a little bit discerning. He's allowing for that. There is such a thing as discernment and wisdom. Now, what I want to point out here, these really harsh words of dogs and pigs, these are terms that we find used in other areas in the Bible. So we can use those other areas to help edify us with this reading. Dogs and pigs usually refer to people who are outside of the faith community, usually meaning Gentiles. So he's saying, don't throw these sacred things. First of all, these are sacred things. So let's give importance and value to what it is that Jesus is teaching here. All right? But then let's have some discernment as to who we're going to hold accountable to this. And if they're outsiders, we can't expect outsiders to know or to follow these commands that Jesus has given. It reminds me of Facebook. It really takes a lot of discernment to know just what to post on Facebook, because you can throw some things out there that you think are really, really precious, but then you could get somebody who comes back with just a lot of venom about what you thought was really a holy and wonderful saying or teaching. Or especially when you're trying to correct somebody, it can come back and escalate. So he's saying, show some discernment in your judgment. He's not saying don't judge, but show some discernment. And I think it's really interesting that he follows this with ask and it will be given to you, and seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. Typically we hear that verse read just sort of as a standalone verse. Ask and anything will be given to you. And we think, oh gosh, I want that big house on the hill. So I'm going to ask for it and ask for it and ask for it. It's going to be given to me. Or at least something really good is going to be given to me by God. But why would this follow what we're reading about don't be judgmental, but be discerning? Don't you kind of wonder, oh Lord, how can I know what's right? How can I know what's wise? Grant me that wisdom. Please, please help me to discern. This is what we can come to God with our request for please help me out. And he says, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. So the Lord, if we come to him in humility and ask for help in discernment and in judgment, he will give that to us in the way that we need it. Okay, that's the importance of reading things in context, folks, right? So in summary of this particular section, I just want to underscore, you can probably come up with a lot of different interpretations of this first part, but and people have, but I want to emphasize the use of discernment, obviously. It's a good kind of judgment, and it can help us help each other within the faith community. And remember that you can't expect a worldly unbeliever to understand or to hold as valuable the teachings of Jesus as we want to. And then again, just to remember, this does also emphasize the importance of the teachings of Jesus. And so we can hold them holy. This is holy stuff we're talking about, of how we cannot be hypocritical and how we can have good Christian character, and then how we can relate with each other. And then finally, this last part of ask and it will be given to you is just a reminder that we can depend on God for discernment, for the ability to obey these teachings, and for discernment to help others out. Now notice here in verses 9, 10, and 11, there are some words that are, sort of familiar in the Sermon on the Mount. Which of you, if your son asks for bread, will give him a stone? And in verse 10, or if he asks for a fish, will give him a snake? If you then, though you are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father in heaven give good gifts to those who ask him? So we find some words here that are very familiar. Bread, asking, and evil, that come from chapter 6. when we read the Lord's Prayer and study the Lord's Prayer. So he's kind of bringing that in. Again, the Lord's Prayer, emphasizing our dependence on God, and this too, emphasizing our dependence on God for all of this. Finally, he finishes this first section with verse 12. So in everything, do unto others what you would have them do to you. For this sums up the law and the prophets. We're very familiar with this one, aren't we? We learned this one when we were kids. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Remember when I started teaching about the Sermon on the Mount, I was emphasizing, especially in chapter 5, how Jesus tends to take something that's known and then twists it a little. Remember that? Here again, we find something that was a familiar teaching to the people at the time, but Jesus twists it a little bit. See, the real rabbinical teaching on this was don't do to others what you would not have them do to you. But Jesus turns that and makes it more positive, doesn't he? Do unto others what you would have them do unto you. So he takes a familiar and he twists it. This is like the difference of saying, don't break the traffic laws, and saying, hey, pull over and help a stranded motorist, right? One is, well, don't break the laws. Okay, yeah, I won't break the laws. But the other gives a lot more responsibility to the person to actually act on what they know they're supposed to do. And it puts that, the location or the location of the motivating force is in the heart. And that's true with the whole Sermon on the Mount, right? We've seen that again and again, that the motivating force is found within the heart. That's the biggest emphasis in this whole thing. I mentioned before that the emphasis on this particular part of the Sermon on the Mount is on relationships with others. So we have to think, who are we in relationship with? And how are we to interact with each one of those? So the emphasis here in this first part of chapter 7 is, first of all, with brothers and sisters within the faith community. Don't be judgmental, but if needed, you can. And if you're pure and you have done some inner work yourself, then you can certainly help to remove a speck from their eye. In other words, help them to walk in the ways of the kingdom of God. But then it moves on to relationship with unbelievers. And it emphasizes that with unbelievers, we are not to be so judgmental. We are not to expect them to follow God's ways, right? Because they haven't taught that. But also don't waste those sacred things. Use some discernment with those people. Love them, but use some discernment and wisdom. Then it moves to our relationship with God and emphasizes our dependency on God so that he can give us the wisdom and the discernment that we need to follow what these teachings say. And then finally, it moves to all people and how we are to interact with all people. We are to treat all people well and treat them in the way that we would like them to treat us, with respect, with love, with mercy, and with justice. So again, I'll sort of summarize. One of the practices that I like to do is to write a summary myself of what I believe are the most important parts of a chapter. And so I will read you Janet's paraphrase, if you will, of this particular beginning part of chapter 7 of the Sermon on the Mount. I'll just read you what I have written down. This is Jesus talking. Look, I'm asking you to be obedient and to follow my difficult teachings. You're going to screw up. So be careful about laying a heavy trip on others when they mess up too. Try to help each other out in all of this. There will be those who just aren't interested. So don't expect them to be obedient. They just won't get it, and they'll rip you up for expecting them to even think it's important. But remember to keep those things special for yourself. Remember, God is on your side. If you ask, God will help you to be obedient. and in all that I've taught you. Just keep asking for his help and for his forgiveness. Finally, do what you know is right in your heart. Treat others in the way you want to be treated, with love, respect, mercy, and justice. Go now in peace.